So, in 1845, a man by the name of Henry Wilson founded the White Star Line out of the remains of the Packet Company, a company which transported passengers, mail, and cargo across the sea. In 1851, the British found a ton of gold in Australia, so naturally, everyone wanted to live in Australia, despite the weird and dangerous creatures, so the White Star started to make ships that would go there. He kind of over-exaggerated how safe their vessels were. Back then, ships were made of wood, which, if you couldn't tell already, wood isn't very durable. White Star Line made a ship called the RMS Taylor and sank on its maiden, first ever, voyage when it encountered some rough waves. After the Taylor sank, the White Star Line lost its postal contracts, making it go bankrupt, until a man by the name of Thomas Henry Ismay, who has a pretty cool looking beard, bought the company for £1,000, which is £124,400 in 2023, and renamed it to the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company. Ismay was then approached by Gustav Wolff and said, I'll paraphrase this in a simple way, I will fund your company if you have your boats made by Harlan Wolff. That's basically what he said. And obviously, Ismay agreed. And then he made the Oceanic class. If you didn't know, that includes that one famous ship called Atlantic that sank, and if you know what I'm talking about. And then started prioritizing on the Atlantic route to New York City, which started a rivalry between the Guin Line, the Inman Line, and most famously, the Cunard Line. Norddeutsch Lloyd, apologies if I've said that wrong, a German company, introduced the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, which became the first ever four-funneled ship. And boy, did the public love it. It became a very popular ship among travelers, and the Oceanic Steamship Company probably thought it was a good idea to make a ship that would rival the Kaiser and his sisters, and made the RMS Oceanic, named after the SS Oceanic, and it was a success. Thomas Ismay unfortunately died after the Oceanic was launched, and his son Joseph Bruce Ismay became the chairman of the company. Meanwhile, Cunard in 1906 launched their Greyhound, and on September 7th, Lusitania went on to her maiden voyage, and won the Blue Ribbon. Shortly after, her sister, the Mauretania, would then take the Blue Ribbon from her. Ismay knew he had to act, and before long he presented 3 new ships, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. These Olympians were far too big for Harlan slipways. So, to fix this problem, they took down their 3 slipways and made 2 far bigger ones. Thus, Olympic and Titanic would be built side by side. Britannic had to wait. Olympic and Titanic were giants. They would be 269 meters long, which is 882 feet, and was 175 meters tall, which is 53.3 feet, from keel to funnels. They would be 45,000 gross register tons, and would then weigh 52,000 tons. There's a difference between gross register tons and tons. They would have 2 3-bladed side propellers. Olympic would have a 4-bladed central propeller, whilst Titanic's was 3-bladed. Titanic's launch was delayed once as Olympic had collided with the HMS Hawk and then lost a propeller blade. In May 31st, 1911, Titanic was launched and soon loaded for boilers, engines, and the rest of her interiors. On April 2nd, 1912, Titanic was handed over to White Star and set sail on her sea trials to Southampton, and docked on April 5th, where she would sit there for 5 days. And on April 10th, she would depart. Titanic almost collided with Inman Line's Essex City of New York, as her powerful engines pulled in New York and snapped the ship's mooring lines. The collision was avoided, however. She set sail and would arrive at Cherbourg the same day, greeted by her little sisters, SS Nomadic and SS Traffic. On the 11th, she would depart from Queenstown in Ireland, now known as Cove, and that was the last time she was ever seen again. Titanic was a marvel. Despite not having 4 turbine engines like Cunard's Greyhounds, she still reached 23 knots, only 2 knots less than Lusitania. Titanic carried 159 furnaces, that's 24 double-ended and 5 single-ended boilers, and produced 46,000 horsepower. She potentially, in theory, could transport 2,435 passengers. Only 1,317 boarded her on her maiden voyage. She could carry 48 lifeboats. However, Titanic was only fit of 16 lifeboats and 4 collapsibles. Each lifeboat could carry 65 people, and if all boats were full, they could hold 1,178. Not even half the passengers, let alone enough for crew. There's a reason for this though, and it will be important later. Contrast to popular belief, lifeboats were not removed for the passengers' view. Both first and second class had enough view for the promenade and even private promenades. White Star and Harlan and Wolf were all about safety. Titanic had many safety features and backups in case something goes wrong. In fact, no rule was enforced that ships like Titanic had to carry enough lifeboats. It was expected that ships that were 10 gross register tons and over were expected to carry 16 lifeboats. That rule wasn't ready for massive ships like Titanic. It was also important to note that lifeboats weren't seen as something passengers had to stay on for safety. It was more rather seen as a ferry. The ship had to sink slow enough for a rescue ship to come to its aid, and ferry passengers from the sinking ship to the rescue ship. In 1909, White Star's RMS Republic started sinking when the SS Florida collided with the Republic. Florida was fine, but Republic started to list heavily and started to sink. Passengers from the Republic were ferried to Florida and only 6 people died. It was all the proof the world needed to know that lifeboats weren't needed in large quantities. Throughout Titanic's voyage through the Atlantic, her wireless would receive multiple ice warnings from Leyland Line's cargo liner, SS Californian, who warned multiple ships on the Atlantic about ice, as most icebergs travel along the Labrador Current in April. Ice warnings weren't ignored, they were just not prioritized. Captain Edward John Smith would even change course, but would still keep going at about 21 knots. On the night of the 14th, it was pitch black out there. No moon meant no sunlight could reflect off the moon. On 11:39 p.m., Titanic's lookout spotted the iceberg 457 meters away. Titanic's crew had only 40 seconds to react. Hard starboard was ordered and an all stop. The ship had just almost cleared the berg, but collision was inevitable, and Titanic struck the iceberg, creating hundreds of small openings in her hull. 5 compartments and 1 coal bunker were breached. Titanic was designed to stay afloat, 3 compartments flooded, 4 compartments at most. It was estimated by her engineers that she would be afloat for only 2 hours. At 12:15 a.m., the first distress signals were sent out. Titanic needed a rescue ship to ferry its passengers, just like what happened on the Republic. However, most ships nearest the Titanic were too far away. Mount Temple was closest to Titanic by 80 kilometers, but didn't respond to Titanic's aid. The only ship to respond was the RMS Carpathia and was 93 kilometers away. She even broke speed records at 17 knots just to reach Titanic in time. It was dangerous. She could have badly damaged her engines and almost hit an iceberg twice, and yet it would still take her 3.5 hours to reach survivors. Before Titanic even spotted the iceberg, her crew saw the SS Californian, the same ship who had sent iceberg warnings. The Californian stopped for the night as it was a much smaller vessel in a giant ice field, and he couldn't see a thing. Californian was only 30 kilometers away from Titanic and both ships could see each other. Titanic's wireless tried to communicate with the Californian, but unfortunately for them, Californian's wireless operator shut down for the night and was fast asleep. Crew on board Titanic tried to communicate through distress rockets and Morse lamps. They started launching distress rockets at about 12:45 a.m., but Californian's captain, Stanley Lord, mistook them for company signals. The mail rooms was the first room above the boiler rooms and cargo holds to flood, and then the squash court. Third-class accommodations were soon flooded as well. 5 minutes after the collision, Titanic took an approximate 5-degree list to starboard due to the placement of the coal bunkers. However, as Titanic flooded more and more, open spaces on the port side started to flood, and portholes on the port side were also open. The crew were unaware of this, and soon, Titanic started taking a sharp list to port, through the sinking until the final plunge. Her list to port gradually increased to a maximum of 14 degrees. Her list to port was more noticeable than her head trim. Head trim means the ship's longitudinal stability, from bow to stern. Many passengers during the sinking believed Titanic would capsize. She didn't. By 1:45 a.m. on April 15th, Titanic's nameplate went under and the bow plunged. Water spilled through the cargo hatches, only accelerating the flooding. Remember, ships appear to go down on the outside more than the inside. Titanic on the inside was a real maze. It's no wonder why third class couldn't get up to the boat deck on the early stages of sinking. Some didn't speak the same languages, and some weren't familiar with the confusing layout and didn't receive help from the officers that they were supposed to get. Many on later stages of the sinking traversed the first class areas, especially the grand staircase. By 2:10 a.m., the lights dimmed to a more reddish orange, and the last lifeboat had been launched 5 minutes prior. By 2:15 a.m., the bridge and forward boat deck started to go under, and the collapsible boats were lowered from the roof of the officers' quarters, and the ship would settle onto an even keel, which no more port list. Titanic has 5 more minutes to live. Eventually, Titanic's first funnel falls, taking down several people. Titanic's dome implosion is a debatable topic, but most people believe that the dome did implode as soon as it was underwater. Glass in the staircase wasn't made to survive much water pressure, and in fact, the staircase is absolutely destroyed on the wreck. If it did implode during the final plunge, any third-class passengers who were lucky enough to escape the lower decks would have not made it. Soon after, the second funnel would go down with a shower of sparks. On 2:17 a.m., Titanic at this point would be at a 25 to 30 degree angle. Due to thermal stress and unsupported weight, Titanic would break just in front of her third funnel. This break was not clean, a very messy break. Her keel buckled and was forced to fail. A structure called the forward tower would separate from the main stern section. The stern section immediately started to flood, and weighed down by her engines, started dropping like a rock. Soon after, Titanic became almost vertical, and her fourth funnel would fall. Interior spaces inside the Titanic started imploding due to the water rapidly entering the stern, and by 2:20 a.m., she was gone. By 3:30 a.m., Carpathia would arrive at the scene and rescue the remaining survivors. Only 712 survived, and 1,496 souls went down with the Titanic. By the 17th of April, Carpathia returned to New York City. In 1916, White Star Line would pay the victims a total of $664,000 US, despite the total of $16 million filed for damages. In 1914, the SOLAS Convention was established for the safety at sea after the Titanic. The Titanic disaster was an event that White Star Line would never recover from. Britannic was delayed to install safety measures, and J. Bruce Ismay fell victim to American yellow journalism, and for years has been portrayed as a villain. In 1913, he resigned as chairman. In the 30s, White Star merged with Cunard to receive funding by the British government. Cunard had authority due to White Star decommissioning ships prior to the merge. MV Britannic and MV Georgic would be the last ships launched by White Star, and in the 50s, Cunard purchased the remainings of White Star shares. Currently, the SS Nomadic is the only remaining vessel of the White Star Line. Although the disaster was tragic, I'd like to think it wasn't for nothing. If Titanic never sunk, safety at sea would have taken many more years, if not decades, to improve. A giant ship like Titanic really needed to sink for the world to learn.